As water and wastewater facilities strive toward decarbonization through greenhouse gas emission goals or energy optimization goals, the conversation tends to include drives. There's actually quite a few things that are happening in the drives market, specifically relating to water and wastewater, due to these particular trends. So, what does this mean for business opportunity for those manufacturers? And more importantly, what does it mean for you as the end user who wants to put a drive on a pump? Well, let's talk about it. Hey everybody, I'm Bob Crossan for Waterworld and Wastewater Digest. I am joined today by Joe Halliday. He is VP of Sales, North American Water Market for Danfoss Drives, and we're going to be talking about advancements in the drives market and what that means for water and wastewater utilities. So, Joe, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Bob. I
So,
really enjoy
what
the opportunity.
Yeah, we talked about a year ago about some of the trends that you were seeing and how Danfoss was approaching that. So, what's changed in that time? What trends are you seeing now in the water and wastewater market?
It's interesting you ask. So some of the biggest things we see are the carbon reduction, energy savings, a greener society, so to speak. Right. We've
Mhm.
done a little bit of research, mainly Google. Right. It doesn't take a lot of rocket science to figure this out. But one uh, 1 kilowatt hour of savings is equivalent to about 1 pound of carbon footprint equivalent. So you can start looking at energy improvements or efficiency improvements and get a direct correlation to, hey, you're going to save 15 pounds of carbon per hour or per day or whatever the schedule comes out to. And that's starting to become very, very important. We've had a project running in Denmark now for, it's got to be 7 years or so. It's the city of Marselisborg, Denmark, where they've actually become 120 to 150% efficient in their system, which means as a wastewater treatment plant, you are now using effectively the byproducts of wastewater treatment, which is biogas, and
Mhm.
you're generating electricity and heat from that. You're using that electricity to run the plant, right? And then if you have excess, you can sell it back to the city or utility. So that's becoming very, very, very important and very, very popular, right? So more and more we're starting to see energy efficiencies being pushed to limits and things like that.
Mhm.
There's a push in the industry, it has been for quite a while, on motor efficiency, where people are looking at premium efficiency motors and whatnot. And when you go from one level of efficiency motor to the next level up, you save roughly 0.9% or you gain 0.9% efficiency. And if you compare drives in the market, and I'll just tell you from a Danfoss standpoint, not to hit you with a sales pitch, but Danfoss is 98% efficiency. When you look at some of our competition or other drives that are out there, they'd be 96% or less. So we can go to consulting engineers and say, well, if 0.9% in motor performance is important to you, then 2% in a drive performance should be more important, right? So we
Mhm.
start discussing things that way. Um, so that's kind of a huge thing, the energy efficiency and performance. The other thing we see, which has been relatively new in the past several years, is that more and more people are starting to use drives on smaller horsepower motors. The
Mhm.
Marselisborg, Denmark story came out of the reality of putting a drive on every piece of rotating equipment. There was a belief or a community thought, if you will, that if it's under 10 or 20 horsepower and it's going to run at one speed, I don't need a drive on it. It's not going to do much for me. But now those horsepower ranges are getting pushed down into the under 5 horsepower range. So we're seeing a lot more smaller motors being outfitted with VFDs for performance improvements. So that's kind of a huge thing as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I mean, smaller motors, I'm thinking of even smaller systems. So now it's like the penetration to provide efficiency to more utilities is seems more applicable or
Right,
available at this point.
right. And so the other thing to think about from a utility standpoint is, what's happening in society, right? Urban
Mhm.
expansion, urban sprawl, if you will, whether the people are moving back into the cities or in the case where I live down in the Georgia area, we're seeing more and more communities being developed on a weekly basis. So
Mhm.
as neighborhood communities expand, they have to have access to water, right? So you've got to deliver it and you got to return it. We call it new and used water, right? So it's got to be handled. one of the things I like to tell people is water is, in my opinion, probably the number one most efficient or most essential business in the world. You have to have water every day, right? And when you use that water, it has to be treated and recycled, if you will. So that's a
Yeah.
huge growth opportunity for us as well. And that's not just for Danfoss, that's for Drives in general. We're seeing a market expansion that way.
Hmm.
Yep.
Are there other trends that or how do you see these trends that you talked about? You talked about decarbonization, kind of energy optimization there, moving toward more drives on even lower horsepower pumps and whatnot. How do you see those things kind of impacting the water and wastewater market, or technology adoption, or utilities, like actual day-to-day operations?
Yeah, so it just becomes basically more prolific, right? They're used
Hmm.
everywhere. People are getting more and more used to them. They're seeing them more and more. They're relying on them more and more. They're actually looking at, in the old days, so to speak, they were simply used for speed control of a motor, right? I want to control the speed of the pump. That's all I care about. In some cases, we call them a shaft turner. We just want to spin the shaft of the motor. Today, since they're being so widely used, they're getting more and more capabilities and features, if you will, right? So
Hmm.
customers are looking at drives to be more reliable, easier to set up, easier to use, right? And longer lasting, right? So we come with longer warranties and things like that. So Danfoss offers a hate to say bumper to bumper because it sounds like an insurance program, which it's really not, but it's a full coverage warranty for 6 years. So if anything happens to that drive in a 6 year period, even lightning strikes it, we take care of it for that 6 year period. At the end
Yeah.
of that 6 years, we can extend it for 4 more. So you've got a drive that you don't have to worry about for a 10-year period. That's pretty huge. I mean, most people don't do that with their flat screen TVs, right? Or their dishwashers or whatever, right? So that's become very important. The other thing that's become very popular is the capability of the drive and what it's giving the user.
Hmm.
Today we have, and we may have talked about this about a year ago, we have a thing called deragging, where
Hmm.
if your pump starts to clog up, that's a monumental money saver because it's become an industry where they go, well, we just have to live with it, right? Pumps clog up, we know they do, so we live with it. We send guys out in trucks, we do outages, we clean the pumps out, we put them back together. It's the nature of the beast, sort of thing. Well, now there's more people that are finding ways to solve that problem. From the pump standpoint, they're using various impeller technologies and things that are non-clogging pumps or whatever, chopper pumps type thing.
Hmm.
From a drive standpoint, we're coming out with pump cleaning features and deragging features to eliminate that maintenance
Hmm.
problem. Again, saves money, right? So that the maintenance people don't have to go out once a week and clean out a pump. Plus, it
Yeah.
keeps the process running better. The other thing that's happening more and more is the drive itself is becoming more of a technology based platform, and it has a wealth of information in its electronic brain.
Mm.
And what we used to do is just use that information for sending energy and controlling the speed of the motor. What we're doing now is using that information to give the user more data about his process and some advanced warning. So we're doing some stator windings in motors. So if the motor starts to wear out before it has a catastrophic failure or a short or anything like that, the drive can tell the owner, hey, somebody better come check on me because we got a little problem here. We do the same thing with vibration. So it's 24/7 online real time vibration analysis. So if something starts to wear, if bearings are getting worn out, if the pump's clogging up, something like that, we can alert somebody to come take a look at this thing before it becomes a problem.
Hmm.
And the last thing we can do is this is kind of it sounds like fuzzy math or fuzzy logic, if you will, but it's called a load envelope. So the drive will
Hmm.
have a learning period of its operations. For example, it might say 3 days or 7 days, a period where it looks at all the values in the operating cycle that pump and motor are running in. And it baselines that as this is my normal range. This is my normal load envelope. And when
Mm.
something starts to fall outside that envelope for whatever reason, again, it trips an alarm or an alert or a warning to the end user so he can go out and do work on it before it becomes a catastrophic failure. So
Hmm.
pump performance, pump maintenance, things like that. And that goes back to being more of an asset to an end user or a customer as opposed to just, well, I've got a box on the wall and it controls the speed of the pump. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, in this market, we have trends that even supersede even what you're talking about too. You have like extreme weather that people are dealing with, resiliency and
right.
sustainability. You've already kind of talked about with the decarbonization. What are some of the business opportunities you're seeing for how drives can address some of those like bigger, broader topics? And are there certain verticals that's more important to, say, like industrial users versus municipal ones?
Right. So what we see in the municipal market is much more NEMA 4X out of the box rated drives. So I can
Okay.
install them right outside without having an extra enclosure, without having any air conditioning, any
Mm.
extra features to it as a standard product. There are a few other manufacturers who are starting to do that as well. We do it from 125 horsepower and down to fractional horsepower.
Okay.
Some people do it in the small fractional horsepower, 10 horsepower and less. So there's a few flavors out there that are a bit smaller, but we've got a very, very wide range in an NEMA 4X offering. From an industrial standpoint, it's pretty much the same thing. Industry tends to be a little bit more specific on just need a drive, I've got spares. It can be more important to them. The interesting difference between an industrial application and a municipal wastewater application is in a municipal wastewater application, we need redundancy because, as we said,
Mhm.
water is so essential, right? And basically, sewage pumping is essential. So if there's a failure in a pump station, probably 90% or more, have a backup, right? You'll have two
Mhm.
pumps in that pump station where you only daily need to use one, but you have a backup and you can lead, lag, and alternate. So if there's a problem, you've got some capability and some redundancy. From an industrial standpoint, they typically won't have that level of redundancy. You could have a very important process line running. If that drive goes down, now you're talking about dollars per minute, dollars per hour, dollars per day of lost revenue because that process line is down. So in that case, spares become much more important and serviceability becomes important.
Yeah.
So that's the way we see things. The demand is still huge,
Mhm.
and it's huge amongst Danfoss and all of our competitors. So the customer base out there is actually really growing across the board, and we're seeing it in the electrification market. We're seeing it in oil and gas. We're seeing it in municipal water. It's very very positive for us.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I imagine with again with that expansion of going lower in horsepower, people wanting to put this onto lower horsepower motors, you're just opening up a whole new avenue of business essentially.
Exactly. That's right. That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
So we've grown service partners, we've grown sales partners, and we've grown, basically key account people as well, direct partners that we deal with.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Joe. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about this. It's great to catch up with you after about a year and learning
Yeah,
how things have shifted or in some cases not shifted as much. But yeah, I really appreciate the time that you've taken with me today.
absolutely. It's always a pleasure, Bob. Happy to help.
Yeah, and for everyone who's watching, you can check out the video description below. I'll have a link to last year's video with Joe so you can see how things have changed over time and any other resources that we have on our website there. And once more to you, Joe, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Bob. Have a great day.